Day 648 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses once again, as currently Russia is sitting on more than 332,000 military personnel losses there, which represents an additional 770 in the past 24 hours. Then as we take a look at hardware losses, 5 tanks, 5 APVs, and 12 artillery. Then we'll head back across to the map today, and we'll start at, at Avdiivka, as there's been some reports that on the northern flank, that Ukraine, or the AFU, has likely retaken the tree line that's south of Stepova, or all the way to it, where the Russian forces have been operating from. But we are waiting for the map updates on that one based off that information that we've been hearing. And so, although Russia may or may not any longer hold this position, their ideal outcome from taking a position like this one would be to perform a pincer movement to surround the coke plant with, which is just below it there. Which, based off this map, actually looks like a town, but in fact, it's about 5 to 6 times bigger than Stepova. But certainly no easy feat to take. And then for the region, we have continued to see more Russian hardware losses, such as the BTR APCs and the BMP infantry fighting vehicles, after recent failed Russian assaults. And it's always some of the 5 most common vehicles that we see Russia deploy on the ground in Ukraine. The same basic 5 Soviet-era vehicles. And more often than not, it's light armored vehicles like these, as opposed to having sufficient or any tank inclusions with many of their offensive attempts. And although certainly a very difficult environment for the Ukrainian forces defending this region right now, on the flip side, the very same thing could be said for the invading force, which, even with today's smaller loss figures, Russia is still averaging about 1,000 losses per day. Much of which is because maybe at least 50-60% is because of this little spot on the map right here. It's quite astonishing, really. Then we'll move across on the map as Ukrainian forces repelled a Russian attack towards Robotina, as Russian forces tried to regain previous lost ground near the big trench network, which has been fought over for weeks. Also, somewhat on the opposite flank, Russian sources themselves claimed further Ukrainian advances north of Verbova, though this will need further confirmation, and as we know by now, Ukraine is always slow to announce liberations. Then we'll move across to Kherson, as things get really quite interesting here, because the first 2 documented losses of the Chinese-made and provided Desert Cross all-terrain vehicles, which are used by the Russian forces, was discovered in positions near to Krinky at the forest. Now, this is what they look like, and needless to say, these 2 vehicles didn't stand a chance against the loitering Ukraine Baba Yaga agri-drone, which was just waiting for the opportunity to pounce. And do note, Russia is expected to have received approximately 3,000 of these Chinese vehicles by the end of the year, with more coming in the new year. But it should be pointed out that using an open-aired buggy-like vehicle, which is close to, or what appeared to be pretty much at the front, in this case, and really of any modern war zone with drones flying above everywhere, is not an ideal environment for such a vehicle to operate within. I mean, hey, even without any drone warfare, there is a very realistic probability of quite easily receiving unwanted fire from things like light arms fire, artillery, shrapnel, really anything. So just when I thought that Russian vehicles or logistics couldn't get any lower than a Buhanka Scooby-Doo tin can van, this comes along. And with a cost of up to nearly 25,000 US dollars per unit, it's cheap in terms of a military vehicle, and I use the term military vehicle extremely loosely here, but it's too expensive or costly a price in terms of its vulnerabilities. But hey, if this is the solution that Russia wants to or can only afford to pay for, then good, let them. Just let them. But I digress and move back to the map as the AFU also stepped up offensive actions just north of occupied Holopristan. As more objectively, Ukraine certainly seeks to cast a pretty wide net in terms of setting up solid positions across the entire span of the south front lines of the river. But it's all about the drones in this region, these small FPV drones, the loitering munitions like the Baba Yagas. And so there's countermeasures that come into play as well. For instance, take a look at this footage of when a drone has its operator signal blocked due to electronic warfare cover by the other side. Now in this instance, this one happens to be a Russian drone that lost control and crashed under the influence of the Ukrainian electronic warfare systems. Now this could certainly happen with a Ukrainian drone as well. But Ukraine has already deployed countermeasures to limit this sort of a possibility or outcome by using things called booster signals to help maintain the connection with the operator. And so a lot of military doctrine could be considered to be counteracting situations or counteracting something that's already been counteracted, just as a never-ending spiral. But it really does come down to which side has the most resources to keep up that little party. Then zooming out a bit later in the video to Russia today, because in Russia there was a fire at a specialized vehicle production facility up in the Moscow Oblast, and the factory for which is believed to be used to support the Russian military. Now, the burning area was about a square kilometer in size, and I can never really help but speculate that the CEO or factory management was under enormous pressure and unrealistic goals for production quotas that came direct from the Kremlin, but also to fulfill these orders or otherwise face severe penalties, such as jail time even. And I've speculated about this for so long, specifically about how the factory owners actually did this themselves. And so then, just a few months ago, it seemed Dmitry Medvedev, who held a meeting as the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, confirmed my suspicions, as he spoke with industry partners, going on a 5-minute rant, quoting Stalin, and basically threatening the group to produce as requested or become criminals. So the best way to save your own behind as one of these Russian company heads is to have an accidental fire that lays waste to your entire production line. And looking at it from the macro, all of these events, really from either side, are simply not conducive to making for an environment that equips the needs of the Russian military sufficiently. Then heading across to some news for today, so start out again with the Ukrainian hardware news, as the winter weather is really starting to gain momentum for many parts of Ukraine, and so too is some of the winter gear needed to assist the Ukraine's military, such as these examples of camouflage suits and thermal nettings that are designed to withstand thermal images, in order to provide some much needed winter time stealth characteristics that benefit the AFU. Then in some other hardware news, Poland has sent 18 additional AHS Crab self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine, which is on top of the 54 Ukraine already has received from the country. But to top that off, Poland is preparing to send a further 56 Crab howitzers as per previous agreements with Ukraine. And they are some pretty capable 155mm NATO standard SPGs, able to provide long-range artillery support of up to 40 kilometers or about 25 miles. It is also equipped with advanced fire control systems, enhancing its accuracy and effectiveness in various combat scenarios. It also has strong armor and is highly mobile, interestingly being built on a tracked chassis derived from the South Korean K9 Thunder SPGs. So it's a formidable artillery system combining firepower, mobility, and advanced technology to support modern military operations. Then we'll move across to some Russian hardware news, and well, we saw the truthfully overpriced Russian golf buggies being used right near the front lines that have zero protection. But no need to rehash that now. It's embarrassing enough for Russia, but in other ways, not to be outdone by themselves, we saw a Russian Gaz truck with some new Mad Max looking protection upgrades on it. One guy even located some Contact 1 dynamic protection units that he decided to pop mostly on the surface of his truck, but that's not how they're supposed to work. They require proper installation and positioning on already armored vehicles, and a vehicle of this caliber isn't designed to take on the impact of the ERA blocks once the charge erupts. Not to mention, the blocks are designed for ATGM fire, so the anti-tank missiles, which Ukraine will likely not use on what I'm guessing is more of a back-end supply truck. But certainly an FPV drone would very easily bypass these upgrades. You see it all the time. And if a block does manage to go off, it presents a real safety issue for the drivers, not to mention probably rendering this vehicle useless. I mean, there's just too much wrong with this concept. But hey, the driver gets that special feeling of the comfort of safety, whether real or imagined. Then in some more news, so in a significant move aligning with global sanctions against Russia, the Swiss government has frozen assets worth about 8.8 billion US dollars belonging to Russian entities. And so, announced several days ago, this action forms part of Switzerland's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which means the frozen assets demonstrate Switzerland's commitment to enforcing economic sanctions against Moscow. Which is quite impressive given the neutrality stance this country would more often than not take in global affairs, especially for a country famously known for its inherent privacy and confidentiality of its, its own banking system, the Swiss banking system. So all in all, this development marks a pivotal step in Switzerland's stance for the ongoing geopolitical crisis, let's say. Then moving across to some more economic or sanctions related news for Russia. So due to said economic sanctions on Russia, we're seeing more and more reports of their civilian passenger Western planes going down. For instance, a few days ago, on December the 1st, an Airbus A321 had to make an emergency landing due to a left engine failure. Then, on the same day, a Boeing 777 flying to Moscow had to make an emergency landing due to a pressure drop in one of its 6 landing gear wheels. Nothing a little duct tape can't fix. But on a serious note, the lack of maintenance and lack of genuine replacement parts on Russia's, let's call it now, aging Western fleet of civilian aircraft, which comprises of about 70% of their entire Russian airliner fleet, is continuing to be impacted. In fact, if you go online and choose any popular Russian flight, you're likely to see some drastic price increases for the industry on any given date. Now, you might be thinking, but hey, it's December, we've got December 25th coming up, Christmas, which is actually not even a public holiday in Russia. They celebrate Christmas based on the Eastern Orthodox Julian calendar for the January 7th instead. But hey, holiday periods aside, the future of air travel does not look good for Russia, and certainly very expensive. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder segment of sorts, so here we go, as Russia is starting to have a real problem with mothers and wives of the Russian mobilized soldiers in Ukraine, as these groups have taken to the streets of even Moscow recently to voice their upset over their family members not coming home or rotating out. And I mean, the amount of different and unique stories coming out on this type of a topic is almost difficult to keep up with. Russian wives and mothers just angry everywhere. And so the Kremlin does see domestic anti-mobilization sentiment as a threat, even from, and especially from, the mothers and wives. So, there is reportedly a new tactic in Russia's arsenal: pay hush money to keep them quiet, at least in the big cities. But even a few thousand rubles could be seen as an insult, or let's say, in the style of classic Russia, the Kremlin might even promise payments under a different legislative name and never pony up, which we've seen before, which would perhaps only seek to infuriate the relatives of the mobilized even more. So the growing discontent is certainly there within the population. And given the Kremlin's really exhaustive foreign policy, let's call it, there's really no way in which this situation gets better for Russia. So the resentment towards the Russian government is quite likely to continue to build up on an even larger scale over time. Then moving across to a bit of a quick lighter segment today, as it appears Ukrainian soldiers are the real Disney princes or princesses of the world. I don't know my Disney stuff that well, but I think this would be Snow White. Then moving across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So Russian state media, TV personalities continue to double down on ridiculous timeframes. For instance, take Uncle Solly from the other night. He now predicts a war between Russia and the Baltic states would take all of about 15 minutes. And given his previous 3-day assessment for Ukraine, with a bit of math, carry the 5, add the 2, it's about 500 years. Actually, we can't even calculate the real figure because Russia never captured the country of Ukraine, let alone do it in 3 days. Oh, and not to mention the Baltic states, the Baltic nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are all NATO-protected members anyway. So now that I think about it, it is likely that it would only take 15 minutes, but not in the way that Uncle Solly thinks. So thanks for watching today, guys. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe as always, if not already. Hopefully in tomorrow or the next. Got quite a couple of busy days ahead, but I'm going to really attempt to squeeze another one in and not go too many days without. But I'll give it a red hot go. We'll see what happens. And yeah, thanks again for watching, guys. Can't thank you all enough for your support and your kindness. The really nice words of support on the comments section below. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.